What's up, everybody? Welcome to another Fresh CFO Fridays. I hope your week is going well. It's kind of crazy for me because it is the last week of July. I feel like the first half of the year was already going by fast, and now this month is over, and it's like time is flying. So, but I hope you all having a great week. Thank you all for joining. Drop in the chat if you can hear me okay. Everything sounds good. Sometimes in StreamYard, we have a little bit of technical issues. So, drop that in the chat. And really excited about this Fresh CFO Friday today. Today, we're going to be talking about the future of work and finance, remote, hybrid, and beyond. If you're new, if this is your first Fresh CFO Friday, every Friday, I get and talk every other Friday. I was doing it every Friday, but I can't do that every Friday. But basically, introduce myself to everybody. My name is Chris Ortega. I'm the CEO of Fresh FP&A, and we provide fractional CFO and advisory services to businesses. I've been in accounting, finance, FP&A, and financial leadership for almost 2 decades, primarily focused in high growth businesses. So, software, technology, retail, e-commerce, pharma, and renewable companies, and other high growth businesses as well too. I lead a global fractional CFO and advisory service company. And Fresh CFO Fridays, like I said, this topic today I think is a hot pressing topic for a lot of people. As we know, the future of work has been changing rapidly. The finance industry, sales industry, this remote versus hybrid, this versus like, hey, I want everybody in the seats. It has caused, I think it has caused like before when I kind of grew up and working up in high growth businesses, right? The remote idea was never really like that far fetched. Coming from the software space, I remember like, it was never I remember one of the software companies I was at, my direct manager was actually in a whole different time zone, a whole different country. He actually lived in Vienna, and this idea of remote was already accepted, and this is like 7 8 years ago. I mean, this is almost for me like a decade where you had the ability to be remote. And it wasn't like, hey, if I had to work remote for a day, it wasn't like, oh man, Chris is gonna be unproductive. Now that's a lot different than when I first started my career, right? When I started my career in public accounting at Ernst and Young, that was there was no remote work. Like, you were either working at, if you were unassigned, right, and you didn't have assigned time. First off, in public accounting, when you didn't have assigned time, meaning that you weren't assigned to a client, all I kept getting was just inventories. Like, I would go do inventory counts at all these different places, and I was like, I have to find a client to get assigned to. This was like early on, right? But when you got assigned to a client, like, I was always at the client site, right? Like, every day it was just never go to the office. We were on prem every day, whether that's in another city or whether that's in another city in Indiana, whether that's in Muncie, which is about an hour and a half away that I was driving. Like, we were always on site, and it was pretty much expected out of most of our audit teams that you had to be on site, you had to be in the audit room, you had to be, when I was a staff one, right? We could never leave until like the manager left. So like that culture early in my career, and this is like a long time ago, right? That was everybody wanted to be on site, right? You had to be there. The next opportunity I had was pretty much you go into the office every day, and that was like the normal thing, right? Like, if you had to take a couple of days where you're like, hey, I got something going on at the house, or I got to go have a dentist appointment, I just want to go work from home, like, it wasn't as bad. And it wasn't like, hey, that's totally fine. And as I matured in my career as well too, like, remote was always an option. But for some organizations and some teams, definitely for some leaders, right, this rise of the remote and hybrid work has really caused a lot of that, I would say, traditional like leadership in terms of like guiding the remote and hybrid. I remember going to a conference last year, and I'll share this personal story, and I won't say the person's name, or give them they'll be anonymous. But I remember sitting across, and I was at the World Finance Forum. Shout out to World Finance Forum. I'll be out at a couple of your events. My next one, I'll be actually in London on September 7th. for the World Finance Forum CFO Innovation. I'll drop a link to that in the chat in the comments so you can like check out that. I'll be in London. But I was out there for their LA event, right? And we had this great conversation. The topic was similar to what I'm talking about today, but it was like the change in the future of finance, and remote and hybrid and on like in person was a topic of conversation that the presenter talked about. And I was sitting in a table, and the World Finance Forum, the LA, there was nothing but VP, CFOs, and senior finance leaders. So my group, my tribe, my people, right? And we all got to this topic, and the presenter was like, "Hey, I want to give you guys a topic to talk about and talk amongst your team and discuss it." And it came to this topic: the remote, hybrid, in person. And a lot of times in these sessions, I always sit back and like listen. Like one thing I've learned is like I just sit back, observe, listen. Yeah, Ed, thanks for dropping that in the chat. Check. I would highly recommend if you're a global finance, accounting, FP&A, CFO leader, make sure to check out the World Finance Forum event in London. They have events all over the world. Highly recommend check them out. I'll be there in September. I'll be in their LA event. Highly recommend them. But we were sitting there, and everybody was going around sharing their piece, and it came to this one CFO, right? And here's where it gets really cringy, guys. It gets really cringy right now. And he talked about the topic, and he says, this is absurd. Like everybody should be back in the office. I'm demanding that my whole team spends 5 days a week. Like this is crazy. Like I'm in the office every day. I get in at 7 o'clock and I don't leave. Like everybody on my team should be there. And I don't understand why we're having all this pushback. This is like he was so on the fence of like in person to hybrid being in the middle and fully remote. This guy was like, he wasn't even on, he was on a whole nother like element of himself. And I remember asking him, I said, "Hey man, like help me understand that. Like tell me a little bit more about what do you feel like you're lacking? Like what was your team successful? Did the finance team break when it was going remote during the pandemic? Like I'm curious. Help me understand a little bit deeper. Like, let's get to the crux of it." And ultimately, as we were asking these questions, and everybody in the group, there's about 8 of us in this table, and all of us were like, "Bro, you're like going hard on this right now." And what we ultimately got to with the result was in having this conversation and this deep dive, and ideally the root cause was he had this very directive driven leadership style, right? And that directive driven leadership style was like when I started in public accounting, right? It's like you came in, you had to get there before the manager was there. You didn't leave till the manager left. And like if I can't see my people, if I can't direct them and tell them what to do, if they're not in the seat, if I can't go out and touch them and direct them, then I know they're not being productive. And that was ideally what his concern was. Like when we got to it, he was just like, "Well, how do I know that they're actually doing work?" And I said, "Okay, so your concern is you don't think your team is being productive. You don't think things are getting done. So let me ask you this. Did you miss a month in close? Did you miss any hardcore deadlines? Did the partnerships with your business partners go down? Did the work quality go down? Did like what were some of those indicators that you were looking at that said, hey, this isn't working?" And he was like, "No, we actually got better in our month end close." And I was like, "Okay, was team morale worse, or what are some symptoms of that you're seeing right now?" He's like, "Well, one of the main things that we're seeing right now is ding, 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 ding. We're seeing a lot of turnover in our finance organization." I said, let me think about that for a little bit. And I said, "Okay, so what kind of turnover are you seeing in your current finance team?" And he managed the finance team globally. I think it was around 100 people that he said that he managed. And he's like, over the last year or so, we've lost over 40 people in the finance team. I was like, "Oh," and I said, "Okay, so when you're having these conversations, these exit interviews, or getting this information on why they're leaving," he's like, "What exit interview? What are you talking about?" I was like, You're not having interviews with people when they leave and trying to understand why they left and what was the concern was?" And he's like, "That's a great idea, but we weren't really doing that." I was just scratching my head. I'm like, "Dude, like this is," and come to find out, right? A lot of his talent, a lot of the people that he had in his team, they were leaving because they're like, "Hey man, we worked like We didn't miss any deadlines. We were productive. There was nothing about the finance team that took a step back because we weren't physically in the office. It's just that you have, as a CFO, this very, I would say, traditional mindset in terms of being everybody 100% in the office, when people had that flexibility, and they had more opportunity to do things. So I tell that story because that's a very extreme side of the story, but it's important to point out in that is that you got to meet talent where they are now. Like, let me just be, this is me, and this may be wild to say, but I think like the opportunity of getting people 100% back to an office versus the opportunity of that same talented, high performing, high potential person to go work at an organization that they have remote or hybrid, that's honestly now that's like a baseline expectation for people, right? Like, if you gotta make me go to the office every week, company A, right? You line up both companies, company A and company B. Company A and company B have the same compensation, the same titles, the same career path. All the things are the same. And when you're going down that checklist, you see company A is like you have to be 100% on site, and that's the expectation every week. Company B is saying, hey, we have a fully remote, or we have a hybrid work schedule where you can come in, 2 to 3 times a week and you pick the days. What do you think that talented, high performing, high potential person is going to choose with everything else being the same? Majority of the time they're going to choose company B because they're like, hey, I love this flexibility that I have, right? I have this opportunity to be able to, go do things. I'm still productive. As long as I'm, delivering, I can still get things done. So this remote hybrid, fully in person has actually become a great hiring tool for people. And when I go back and look at the impact that this has had on my teams, right? I've never been a more and you guys are probably know this about me from my posts and everybody that's worked with me, right? Like, even our clients know, like, I'm not a very directive driven person, right? Like, I'm not like, I'm very like, hey, when my team, even with the team at Fresh FP&A we support, and the team that works with us at Fresh FP&A, the pod of resources that help support me and the book of business that I have, the pod that helps supports our other fractional CFOs, the expectation is like three things. Hey, as long as you're delivering high quality work, you're being a great business partner, and you're delivering high quality work, you're a great business partner, and you're meeting your commitments. As long as you do these three things, I don't care where you do that at. I don't care what time zone you do that at. I don't care what part of the world. I don't care what day of the week. I don't care what hours. That is the expectations that we have, and the measuring stick that we hold ourselves against at Fresh FP&A. And that comes across a lot from the teams that I manage, right? Like, I always had, when I became a people leader and leading finance, high growth finance organization, that was always my thing. I was like, I don't care how you do it, where you do it, when you do it, as long as you're delivering these three things, we're good. Now, if these three things, high quality work, being a great business partner, and delivering on your commitments, and being timely on your commitments. Now, if we start having an issue with those because of you're working remote and you can't prioritize and you can't deliver and you can't execute, that's a whole different conversation, right? But for me, like, I've always just naturally had that, and that has always given our team like flexibility. So like, this impact on remote work and the finance had a big impact, both positive and negative, right? I can see it from both sides of it because one drawback that I see of not, and I realize this, and for everybody that knows me, like, if you can't tell already, you're like, dude, how's this guy a finance person? He screams extroversion. I do, right? Like, one of the things that I've learned that I miss the whiteboard conversations. I miss the ad hoc, like, hey, let's go grab a coffee or a tea downtown and talk about a business topic, right? I miss popping into other leaders' offices and scheduling 30-minute just brainstorming meetings where we're just like, hey, let's just talk about an idea, right? Let's just let our minds go. Like, I do miss that. And I think when you look at the impact that that has, right? Those conversations are so impactful, right? I remember sitting in board, like, going in the meeting room, and we're like, hey, our net dollar retention rate went down, and it consistently, we're seeing a trend where it's decreasing. let's go have a whiteboard conversation and talk about it. Like, let's get sales in the room, let's get finance in the room, let's get client success. Like, let's get some people and just talk it out, right? And that organic kind of conversation, that organic kind of collaboration, you miss that when you're fully remote, right? And we all know, right? Maybe this gives some people some pain right now, right? But remember at the peak of the pandemic, like the virtual happy hour thing that was going on, right? I think that died off pretty quick, right? But you miss that. You don't get that same interaction, that same connection, that same collaboration when you're doing it all virtually, right? And me leading Fresh FP&A, that's one thing that people were like, Chris, that's one thing why I love traveling so much, right? But it's also been a challenge for me because primarily I do most of the leadership, most of the client work, most of everything that I'm building for Fresh FP&A. I do it in my office, right? And I need to go have that interaction with people. And the only interaction I get with people is, when I leave the office to go to the gym or go work out. But I think that's a piece that's missing when you're fully remote and you can't get that interaction. I think another drawback of being fully remote is you miss that opportunity to have like that real time coaching, right? Like it becomes even like when you see something like you can go in a meeting and it's like, all right, well, hey, I gotta see you this other Zoom meeting and let's pop on another Zoom after the Zoom we just had. That was like an hour. Let me give you like some coaching, right? You miss a lot of that engagement. And when you particularly look at when I look over my career, like just being around those conversations, right? Like sitting back and having the dialogue, like you miss those because when you're remote and you're using Slack, you're using Team, you're using whatever collaborative tool, you don't get a lot of that other things going outside the business, right? Like I love like popping in and saying, hey, HR, tell me what's going on with HR, right? And just oh, Chris, we got this going on. Now it's like you got to schedule time with them. And then it seems like more of a status update and these things. So I think that's one of the major things that are missing out of this. And that's one of the challenges, right? And one of the things that we're talking about. Like, that's definitely a challenge that you face, right? But there's always a balance. And for me, if I was to say, Chris, if you were to bank on one of these fully remote being on this side, right? Hybrid being in the middle, or 1,000% in person. I'm curious to know from you, everybody on the live right now, if you were to pick one of those, drop in the chat. I can drop in, post a comment. If you were to choose one, right? Fully remote, hybrid, or 100% in person, I'm gonna tell you my recommendation and my insight would definitely be a hybrid schedule. Ding ding, if you didn't know that, right? I think there's a balance, right? And I'm starting to learn like when people have the opportunity to go collaborate, now when you get in the office, you're like, you're seeking that collaboration. You're like, man, I want to get some people together and have these whiteboard sessions and maybe go out to lunch and do these cool things or go meet with the client or have a prospect come in or, work on these skills or do this presentation for the sales team or, I think that's like really, really, really valuable. So I would recommend if you're evaluating that as a leader or if you haven't figured it out, I think a hybrid schedule, even from like a talent perspective, right? If you're like, hey, we're a hybrid workforce. This is how we don't mandate that Monday and Wednesday you got to come into the office. It's just, spend some time 2 times a week to build that connection, to have kind of like that pulse inside the business. I think is really, really important. And particularly for CFOs, right? As you're leading finance organizations, right? It's I get back to that directive versus collaborative kind of work environment, right? If your expectation and you're the CFO, right? You're the top finance leader. You have 1,000% right to say my expectation, Chris, is going to be everybody's going to come into 100% of the office, right? I caution you on that because you got to meet talent where they are, right? And I laid down that scenario where company A, company B, everything being the same in terms of comp and all that titles and all that other stuff, but one is 100% in person and one is a hybrid or remote kind of flexibility. That is actually a tool right now for a lot of people to continue to retain talent people, right? Because at the end of the day, right? If you're productive, right? Getting back to my three criteria, right? If you're delivering high quality work, you're being a great value added business partner, and you're delivering on your commitments that you make to the business or the commitments to the team, why should it matter? Like, why? Why should that be a concern whether that person is doing that, 8 o'clock at night in Europe, right? 8 o'clock in Europe would be 2 o'clock here. So yeah, they're doing it 8 o'clock in Europe, right? And I think like that is the future of it. Listen, that's my perspective on it. I don't think that's going to change. I meet with so many global finance, CFO, VP of finance, just finance leaders from all over the globe, right? And this is still a topic, right? And you got people in different boxes of it. But I fully believe that this isn't like a wave or a trend, right? I don't think in like 3 years from now we're gonna get back to everybody 100% in offices. Because here's another thing, right? Put the CFO hat on, right? A lot of CFOs that had all these, and you see it with the big tech companies, right? You see it with the big tech companies. You see it. I was out in San Francisco. You literally see it in San Francisco. Like San Francisco is completely different in terms of like how it was when all the tech companies were there, and now they're all leaving because they're like, why should we have a physical office? Like if our people, if we got this space that we're paying multi-million dollars a year, and there's like 10% of the workforce goes into the office, right? So CFOs were like, why do we need this physical space? And a lot of times I see one great CFO was like, Chris, we limited our all of our physical spaces. And what we did as a supplement for that, for people to still have a home base, we allowed a lot of these like these these spaces, and we gave them like discounts, right? And we said, okay, like if you still want that collaboration, if you still want that connection, we're offering, a $50 rebate for you to go either join this space this collaborative space that we have, this meeting space, or you can go find your own, right? And now what's that turned into, right? CFOs are saving money because they're not spending these millions of dollars. And now it's become an extra incentive for employees to say, hey, we value that collaboration and in person is important to us. And although we don't have a physical office, we're still going to give you a benefit to still get that, right? We're going to say you have a meeting space, Regis or WeWork or whatever, fill in the blank of all those spaces because there's a lot of them, and they give you $100 off of it. Now it's like, hey, I know when I want to go and I need that connection, or if I got teammates that are clustered here. Another thing that is offered is, I think, another great way to build that engagement. A lot of people are having like these quarterly or semi-annual, just like everybody comes into a place, right? Whether that's Orlando or one of these big areas, and just say, hey, we want to get the whole team together, right? I know we've been dispersed, but we're going to have a all hands company retreat. We'll all get together. We'll spend money on hotels, flights, everything, and we want to have everybody together for a couple of days to have that connection and interaction, right? And I know the math behind it. I'm like, you're still saving money, right? Because now you don't have this physical space. You're not tied into these long lease agreements. And sure, that's a great point. Lease commitments can cost millions of dollars for sure, but there's ways of being flexible around that. Because two things, that the tenant still wants you to be part of that, and then you got a lot of negotiating power, right? And a lot of those companies are looking at the analysis saying, hey, when we're looking at this last 10 years, we're banking on that this is not going to change. Why are we going to continue to invest all this money in this office? Let's take the loss now. Let's make sure we recoup that and find a way to have that, more incentivized around the remote and hybrid culture. Um, so that's become a great like leveraging opportunity for talent, right? And I think one of the most important things on the CFO side is like you got to build a strong remote culture, right? And that's tough. That's tough when it's virtually, right? Some ways that I connect with my team every Tuesday morning globally, we all get together on our Teams call, and we all just have that time to collaborate and connect. What's the pulse in the business? What's going on? What can we help with? What are the priorities? What commitments do we have? And I kind of give an update of where we're at in the fresh FP&A business, right? And everybody kind of goes through and gives their update of what areas they're working on, whether it's our marketing partner, whether it's our technology partner, whether it's our partner, some of our partners that we bring in, that are other CROs and chief marketing officers, or chief revenue officers, chief sales officers. We have that time to collaborate, which I think is really really important. But it's also a balance, right? Because I don't know about you, but when I get another, man, this may sound bad, but when I get like another hour virtual meeting, I'm like, man, can this be done in 30 minutes? Or like, can how can we get this done without having to meet, right? Because you're moving so fast, and I think we got to a point where we got Zoom fatigue, or we got Teams fatigue, or Google Meets fatigue. People were going through that, and they were having this moment of just like, man, this is becoming too much. So I think it's definitely a balance, but it's definitely important to build a great culture virtually. And when you have that opportunity to have people meet in person, I think that's hugely, hugely valuable. So yeah, that is what I wanted to talk about today. Give you my insights on the future of work, particularly for finance, remote, hybrid, or beyond. If you enjoyed this session, make sure to like, comment, subscribe on our YouTube page. Just look us up at Fresh FP&A. And also, if you want to learn more about how Fresh FP&A can help transform and scale your finance organization, check us out at, I'll leave the link here, www.freshfpa.com. Check us out. And I hope you all have a great weekend. I'm really excited about this weekend. We got probably the best boxing welterweight fight. This is gonna be my version, or my my generations, right? Hagler Hearns. This is my generations. Ali versus Frazier. This is my generations. Tyson's versus Lewis. Earl Spence versus Terrence Crawford. It's gonna be a tremendous boxing fight out in Vegas. I think the whole boxing world has been waiting for this fight to happen. I'm really, really excited to watch that. If people were banking, I get Earl Spence. I got him either two ways, two outcomes for Earl Spence. Either he takes Terrence Crawford and he can't take the punishment, he knocks him out, or Earl Spence is going to win by unanimous decision. Really excited to watch that this weekend. Two welterweights. Being a former boxer myself and seeing these two guys in their physical prime fight is going to be absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for your time. Hope you enjoyed the session. And as I always end, keep pushing, never settle, and the best is yet to come. Let's get it. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thank you.